A simple apology is all David Bisard had to offer as he left court in handcuffs. 3 years after the deadly crash that killed a motorcyclist, the suspended IMPD officer is now facing time behind bars. Today, we're sitting down with Marion County Prosecutor Terry Curry, who pushed for the charges that led to this trial. And today marks 1 year since the South Side explosion. The neighborhood of Richmond Hill is rebuilding. And we're sitting down with Public Safety Director Troy Riggs for a conversation on where the investigation stands. It's all coming up on this edition of Indianapolis This Week.
From RTV6, Indianapolis This Week.
Good morning, I'm Rafael Sanchez. More than 3 years later, justice for the victims of suspended IMPD officer David Bisard. On Tuesday, Bisard was convicted on all charges against him in the crash that killed Eric Wells and injured 2 others. The trial took just over 3 weeks, and the 12 jurors took just over 7 hours to decide that David Bisard is guilty of all charges, including DUI, causing death, and reckless homicide. The key piece of evidence in this case, the blood vials that showed Bisard had a blood alcohol content of 0.109 at the time of the crash, was fought over in the courts for the months leading up to the trial, but the prosecution won. Eventually, a judge approved the blood as evidence. It's too early to say if Bisard's defense team will appeal the guilty verdicts, but for the family of Eric Wells, those verdicts were a major victory.
I think today's verdicts send a good, strong message to IMPD, maybe to all law enforcement agencies, that you're responsible for your actions, and you're not the law. You represent the law, and when you set yourself up above it, this is what happens.
Joining us now is one of the key players in the Bisard trial, Marion County Prosecutor Terry Curry, who refiled felony alcohol charges in the case back in January of 2011. Mr. Curry, good morning. You took a risk because your predecessor, Carl Brizzi, had dropped the charges. You took the risk.
And I'm not sure I would characterize it as a risk. Ironically, over the course of over 25 years as a trial attorney, alcohol-related charge was something I'd never worked on. And so when this occurred in August of 2010, obviously we were within a couple of months of our election. I was just a candidate at that time. And to this day, I don't know what triggered me to look into this. But at the time, both Carl Brizzi and Officer Bisard's counsel kept referring to the fact that the blood draw was inappropriate because the med tech was not, quote, certified. And so, again, I don't even know what triggered me to do the research, because it was not an area I was even familiar with at the time. But I personally started looking at it. Number one, determined that there was no requirement of certification, that the term they used, but in addition, it became pretty clear that there was some ambiguity in that area, and that there were 2 or 3 statutes that seemed to contradict each other. But as I said at the time, and then when we refiled the charges, because there was this ambiguity, we felt it was appropriate to let a court tell us what the law was. We did feel we had a pretty compelling argument. It certainly was not absolutely clear-cut, but ultimately, obviously, at the end of the day, our argument prevailed.
And obviously, you were successful. Any concern, though, when you did get the case, all this talk of the mishandling of those vials, I mean, that made it much more complicated as we were hearing all these reports. Mm-hmm. Did you ever think, well, maybe not? I mean, obviously, you did, but was there any concern about that evidence?
No, there was never. If the question is, was there ever a thought that we shouldn't go forward with this because of problems that might have occurred? No, that never crossed our mind. To the extent that the things were perhaps not handled the way they typically would have been handled in terms of where the blood was drawn and then the chain of custody, we were pretty comfortable that even though the defense would be able to raise questions about it, that at the end of the day, the chain of custody was intact. The viability of the blood in terms of the ability to test it would with no problem. And so we knew there were going to be a lot of hurdles to jump over, but we felt once we did that we would be able to establish that there was no possibility that the blood had been tampered with, no possibility the blood was tainted, and that it would be deemed to be admissible, and obviously that proved to be the case.
This case went on for 3 years, 3 months. The public highly critical of the entire system. You heard the criticism that came to IMPD, that just came to the entire justice system. How does one rebuild that trust? Because you need a lot of these folks to serve on your juries. So how do you start to sort of sort of heal those wounds.
Right, and part of our, I guess, if there were a larger purpose in prosecuting this case was to make sure that ultimately the truth was known in terms of what transpired, and I think it's clear, at least to me, that there was never ever any intent to sabotage this investigation, and there certainly was nothing done that was intended to shield Officer Bisard. Could things have been done better? Yes, and I think part of the reason that it appeared that things had not been done appropriately was because the officers responding to the scene handled the situation with kid gloves. I don't think there's any question about that, given there was another officer. And secondly, I just don't think it crossed anyone's mind that the officer might have been intoxicated at 11:30 in the morning, and he clearly did not exhibit the usual signs of intoxication, because not only did the police officers say that, but independent witnesses as well. The doctor had examined him at the clinic, the nurse who drew the blood, all said he did not exhibit any of those signs. And so I think part of what came out of that was a perception that was not 100% accurate. I don't think there was ever an intent to be any sort of cover-up. And so I think now, I think in terms of referring to the bigger purpose and the bigger picture, I think by having the entire sequence of events come out in the course of the trial, by obtaining the conviction, I think we're in a position to move forward, and it would be my hope that the public can have complete trust in our police department. I do, absolutely.
Are you ready for appeals?
Certainly. We will, I don't think there's any question there will be an appeal prosecuted in the case, and when that's done, by law, the Indiana Attorney General represents the state of Indiana in the appeal, but we obviously work hand in hand with the Attorney General in addressing those. We worked hand in hand with the Attorney General in the interlocutory appeal that was taken regarding the blood draw, and obviously we prevailed on that issue.
In our last 30 seconds, on this Sunday, we remember the folks of Richmond Hill. This is the one-year anniversary. Your thoughts as you are looking at possibly 3 trials in the near future?
Right, and we have our work cut out for us. A lot of the initial discovery has been done in terms of the things that we have to do in any litigation. There will be more to do over the next several months, but we're prepared to devote as many as 4 deputy prosecutors to be working on this, a significant amount of their time beginning in December, and we'll be ready to try the case.
Marion County Prosecutor Terry Curry, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please come back. Yep. After the break, we'll be joined by our political insiders, their take on the Bisard ruling and reaction to this week's election results across the nation. You're watching Indianapolis This Week. Joining us now, 2 of our political insiders, Democrat Kip Tu and the editor of IndyPolitics.org, Abdul Hakim Shabazz. We just heard from the Marion County prosecutor on the issue of David Bisard. Police and prosecutors, do they have to do more to rebuild trust in the community in light of that verdict?
I actually think the verdict helped in that regard to restore some trust. The jury of peers found him guilty. Terry Curry, I think, previously on the show, I think said some things that I hope are healing. He has faith in the police department. He said there was no cover-up. I think that's helping, I think, in healing those rifts.
Another thing I think is helping, too, is the fact that Public Safety Director Tori Riggs and the Mayor Greg Ballard are looking at IMPD's rules and procedures, tightening things up so matters like this don't happen again, and not just leaving them for the police department, but also expanding to all departments of public safety. And
I talked to Director Riggs. We expect to see some of those changes in January. On Friday, we saw job numbers, and no one was expecting the larger numbers, about more than 200,000 jobs created previously, even though the government shut down. But the economy is still running on fumes.
Well, I don't think the economy is running on fumes if you look at the stock market or you look at corporate profits, it's doing fine.
So what's going on, though? Because
and we've since I think 44 months in a row now, we've had positive job growth in the country. Still not where we need to be. We still have a higher unemployment rate than we ought to have. But if the Republicans would come to the table and try to help solve problems rather than just being obstructionists, we might even do better.
Well, I think part of what it is we just learned to do more with less. Is what it is. We're learning to be much more productive in a lot of places with fewer people. I also think something that's contributing to those large unemployment numbers is the skills gap that we have. And the fact that there's so many jobs that are open and available, but we have so many people that aren't qualified to do it. And the conventional wisdom is that if everybody was qualified for every job that was open, we'd cut our unemployment rate in half.
But you would agree that we have positive numbers.
Yeah, of course, when you're valedictorian in summer school, you got no place to go but up because they've been bad for so long.
No, they've been good for 44 months in a row.
Around the country, we saw elections in New Jersey as well as Virginia. The Republican Chris Christie won there, and of course Terry McAuliffe, the Democrat, won in Virginia. The Tea Party candidate, for example, in Virginia, did not do
what a shame. I cried all the way. I mean, what it was a victory for moderate, conservative Republicans who can appeal to a broader sense of the electorate. I keep telling my ideologically conservative friends that the candidate you win in a primary is not necessarily a good candidate that you have for a general election. They didn't realize that in Virginia. They had a good candidate, their lieutenant governor, but the crazies came out, picked a Cuccinelli, and now you got Terry McAuliffe.
Is it fair to call them crazy? Because, I mean, they do have a viewpoint. There is something that they have to say. So you call them crazy, but are they really crazy?
Yes. They are nuts. And I went ahead and said it. These are the same people who want to put the marriage amendment on the ballot, who are the same people who gave us Richard Murdoch back in 2012. It is a disaster waiting to happen. We saw what happened in Virginia. You saw what happened in the 1st District of Alabama, where the business conservative finally won because somebody woke up. And you see what happens when you have a moderate like Chris Christie who can appeal to a broader electorate.
I take it you'd want more Tea Party candidates in the country.
Actually, no. I hope that the fever is broken, because I do think that the country is better off when you have two functioning parties competing with each other when it comes to ideas. And all we've had over the course of the last few years is the Tea Party leading the Republican Party around by its nose, being anarchist, shutting down government, leading us close to default. I hope the fever's broken. I hope that the results of this election are okay. It's time for Republicans to come to the table and talk seriously about our nation's problems.
Kip, you took exception to what Dan Coates earlier this week on the Senate floor. What was the problem with that?
Well, there was a vote on the Senate floor for the Employment Non-Discrimination Act to extend it to gay, lesbians, and transgender. He's the only senator in the United States who went to the floor to speak against that. It passed overwhelmingly with bipartisan support. He opposed it. I think he's dead wrong on the issue.
I don't agree with Senator Coates, but I see where he was coming from. He does not believe in discrimination. What he said was he did not think the measure went far enough to protect religious liberty and religious freedom for people of faith who have serious issues with that. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I can respect his point of view.
And final issue, the president earlier this week apologized for what is known as healthcare.gov, the Affordable Care Act website that's not working. Is that a good step, a bad step, or is that a sign of surrender?
I think it's a good step. I haven't heard an apology from George W. Bush for wrongfully invading Iraq, and I think people dying in Iraq is a lot worse problem than a website not being up on time. And so, this president, when he makes a mistake, he goes before the American people and he says he's sorry.
Can you equate that? I mean, is that a fair equation?
The three biggest whoppers: the check is in the mail, I'll respect you in the morning, and if you like your health insurance plan, you can keep it.
And also mission accomplished. To be fair, right? To be politically fair, they're whoppers across the spectrum.
Yeah, but I'll give the president credit for finally coming out admitting, hey, we're sorry. Our bad, it was a problem. Now the question is, will you give the American people a break by extending the amount of time that it takes to sign up for this disaster that you're forced to participate in?
10 seconds, chime in and you're done.
Well, look, the president, when he said you can keep your insurance as long as it wasn't, he should have added, as long as it wasn't crappy insurance. And so if that's one of the biggest lies in America, I'll take it.
They are the best in the business. The conversation between our insiders continues on Twitter. Check out their Twitter handles and give us your opinion and stay up with Kip, Abdul, Lara, and Jennifer throughout the week. After the break, it has been 1 year since an explosion rocked the south side of Indianapolis and changed a neighborhood forever. I'm sitting down with the Director of Public Safety to talk about what happened, what he learned, and where the investigation now stands. 1 year ago today, a neighborhood on the south side of Indianapolis was changed forever. 2 lives lost and dozens of homes damaged when a home exploded there. I sat down with the Director of Public Safety Department, Troy Riggs, to talk about what we've learned from that night and where the investigation stands now.
It's hard to believe it's been a year. So much has happened in a year. But, when I reflect back, I remember being there during the fire, right after the explosion, walking through the area with the mayor, seeing our first responders doing just a tremendous job, talking to some of the victims, hearing about the deaths. It was a tough day. And then as we started to move on, the process of not only trying to find out what happened and ultimately holding people accountable that caused this explosion, but watching our city government agencies come together and help the citizens rebuild their lives. And I will tell you, I think that Richmond Hill's explosion demonstrated to the nation the capabilities of our workforce and the outstanding work they did. But the thing that I think that gets missed, I think it also demonstrated a lot about the people of Richmond Hills. They were very caring, They worked with our employees. This is the only major incident that I've ever been involved in that we haven't received a complaint from any of the residents of Richmond Hills. They've been very supportive. I know they've had incredible stressful situations, and not once did they lash out at the first responders or government service providers that were there to help them. That is a natural thing that usually happens, and they didn't do that. They, in fact, held dinners for our first responders, and they made the healing for our first responders possible.
This was the test for this department, for this agency, coordinating fire and police and EMS. A test for you. You had only been on the job for a couple of weeks. How did that all come together? Because that is a major task on a day when both on and off-duty public servants responded.
Right. Well, one of the things the mayor and I talked about before I even arrived here was the importance of all of our agencies working together. It's no secret nationally, we've seen it with terrorism and some of the attacks, that sometimes when these things occur, more often than not, government has a hard time unifying and working together. The initial response was excellent. One of the things that we noticed about 12 or 13 hours into the response is we have so many government agencies showing up that we need to coordinate the effort. And one of the untold stories of Richmond Hills is that being here right at 2 weeks, I picked up the phone and called the mayor's office and asked for total authority over the scene, meaning I want authority over all government operations under Homeland Security to coordinate the effort. The mayor granted that immediately. Now, I knew he was a Marine, but I forgot that he was a Marine in charge of logistics. He understood the importance of this, but he gave us two mandates at that time. Number one, if someone's responsible for this, find them, let's hold them accountable. And number two, let's make sure we help citizens rebuild their lives. But we learned a couple of things. If we have to do mass evacuation again, one of the things that we didn't do so well is mark the homes that had already been searched. We had 2 or 3 different crews working around. It was hard for them to determine what had been searched and what hadn't. A small detail, but it's something we can improve on doing. But this city is more prepared than any city I've ever been to deal with a mass casualty or a major event. And we're trying to strengthen that more and more.
This still remains an active investigation. There's still a 4th person. There was some DNA found, but that person has not been identified. So how active is this still for the city?
The investigation continues. It will. I can't really talk a whole lot about that. Plus, we have pending case and litigation, so we won't go into details on that. But obviously, we're always concerned. If there's anyone else that has information regarding this, we tell them, like we always do, give us a call and give us the information. We will continue to investigate until we believe we have everyone that's responsible.
Troy Riggs, Public Safety Director. After the break, a special look into the life of one of the survivors of the Southside explosion and the bond she holds with one of the suspects accused of causing the tragedy. Abby Jackson is a former homeowner who lived close to what investigators call the ground zero of the Southside explosion. But she's also close to one of the suspects charged with causing the deadly explosion. Just a couple of days ago, she invited us to her home to talk about that relationship, the recovery, and the reason that she can't return to Richmond Hill. Abby Jackson took us to a place which takes her back in time. The attic holds some of her family's belongings, salvaged from their old home in Richmond Hill.
I was thankful to get this one full box is pictures that were underneath my bed, so I was excited to get those.
But it's the vivid pictures of houses burning, people screaming for help, and fire engine sirens screeching that traumatized her family of 6 in November 2012.
And I'm just continuously screaming, we're being bombed.
She lived 3 houses down from the home which exploded and killed Dion and Jennifer Longworth.
Every day when I think of them, I'm like, I just can't even imagine. I cannot even imagine, and they were just wonderful people.
Abby was shocked when she learned her neighbor Monserrate Shirley was among the 3 people arrested on murder and arson charges.
I feel so deceived as a friend, and especially because I talked to her several times after the explosion happened before her arrest, and just how normal she acted.
During their friendship, Abby often had Monserrate over for cookouts. She preferred to be called Muncie. Abby traveled to Puerto Rico to meet Muncie's family, and they spent time in and out of each other's homes on the city's south side.
Her being a friend of mine, and then just the deceitfulness, it's like a stab in the heart. I can't even look at that lot without just, because I have lots of memories in her house, and we did just tons together, and I still have the anger and the frustration and the, but I have to give that all up to the Lord, because if I try to take on that myself, I get too, it's just too hard.
Abby says she can't return to Richmond Hill. It's too painful. By the fireplace in her family's new home, you'll see the address marker from the old house, a sign of where they've been, while they embark on a new beginning, in a new neighborhood, with a new outlook.
I try to just live for today, and things are in so much more perspective.
Abby and many others could not talk about the criminal cases because they will more than likely be witnesses in the pending trials. Our Call 6 investigators have more exclusive stories and video with a special event that's scheduled for this Monday. I hope you'll join us for our program, Richmond Hill, The Road to Recovery. It airs Monday night at 7:30, again Monday night at 7:30, right here on RTV6. That's it for this edition of Indianapolis This Week. Thanks for joining us. I'm Rafael Sanchez, and you have a great Sunday.